This city, Prague, is known in Jewish tradition as an Ir Va'em B'Yisrael, a city and the mother in the family of Israel. Still in the shadow of its great castle, Prague's Jewish quarter was once so great in promise and in hope, now rich only memories and monuments, like a widow whose finest years are gone. And I, who knew and so loved her Jewish life, glad of a chance to relive bits of my own youth. And wherever I go, I sense how she sits solitary, longing for her children. Darling of Czech legends, Princess Libusha, who ruled this city even before it was called Prague, had prophesied that before long there would come to this country a people persecuted, few in number, believing in the one God, and here they would find haven, and here they would bring blessing to the land and all who live in it. In fact, the Jewish community in Prague began just about 1,000 years ago, right here at the crossroads of the caravan route from Regensburg to Kiev and from Turkey to Russia. Came traders, merchants. Here they established fondaci, or warehouses. And among these traders from Byzantium in the east and from Germany and France came Jews as well. The Jews not only lived here, but they also enjoyed exactly the same rights as the other traders and merchants, but not for long. "1096 was the year of the First Crusades. They brought pillage, murder in their wake. The caravan routes became unsafe, but the Jews remained here. Soon they established here small farmhouse synagogues and communities at other more local crossroads. And before long, Prague was truly an important community. For reasons that are not entirely clear, the Jews convinced themselves in the early 1200s that the Messiah was imminent. Many of them sold their homes, they packed, literally sat on their luggage, in the event the Messiah did not turn up. I think that might explain why, a few years later, they built this magnificent synagogue, one of the oldest and most magical synagogues in the whole world. It is a purely Gothic building, solid and rectangular on the outside, but inside everything points to heaven. Above the lintel as you enter, there is the symbol of Israel, vine branches growing out of a hill. And the Altneuschule has a very unusual feature. To illustrate the cry of the psalmist, "Out of the depth I cry to you, O Lord," the chazan, or the cantor, actually is below floor level, literally out of the depths. He cries to God. And when I lived in Prague for a short time after the war, I was honored to be asked to take part in leading the service here on the eve of Rosh Hashanah in 1945, probably because I was one of the very youngest people to survive from the community. As I was making my way here, crowds everywhere. It seemed as if every Jew from the neighborhood and the area felt that they wanted to be together and at the Altneuschule for what was one of the happiest and saddest Rosh Hashanahs in its history. And the opening line of the afternoon psalm, I felt, was composed for just that occasion. And the words came tumbling out of heart and mouth. Ashrei yoshvei veitecha, Odi Hallelujah Selah. Happy are they who may dwell in your house, yet will they praise thee. Selah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu Rafa'einu Hoshienu v'nivashei Tefillatenu. Very near the Altneuschule is Prague's other and most ancient and moving monument, this old cemetery. When they stopped burying here in the 18th century, there are many sections where the burials are to a depth of 12 bodies. They wanted to preserve this cemetery just as long as it was humanly possible. You find so many of our traditions represented here. Many of the names are encoded. For Kohen, the hands in the gesture of the priest, blessing the people. The Levi, responsible for washing those hands, represented by a jug and the bowl. The bear for dove, scissors for tailors. The stag, Tzvi, happens to be my own name. Women are frequently represented by flowers, and rose seems to have been the most popular name. There are also many slender women figures which stand for virgins, but sometimes they hold a single flower in their hand, and that is young women who died in childbirth. I came across an edict that refers either to this cemetery or perhaps the still older Jewish one here in Prague, which I think is unique. It's an edict by King Ottokar II, the date March 29, 1254. And this is what it says. If a Christian devastates in any way their graveyards or enters it by violence, he ought to be sentenced to death. And then it goes on to say, and all his fortune will go to the royal treasury. So Jews had protection, and King Ottokar might have done well out of it as well. The centuries witnessed a succession of rises and falls in the fortune of the Jews here. Good Friday, in particular, was a most dreaded date in medieval Jewish calendar. In 1389, in this very neighborhood, Good Friday, more than 3,000 men, women, and children were massacred by those who wanted to avenge the death of their Savior. In fact, you could say that there was here a series of expulsions, admissions, readmissions, almost always accompanied by fines, and sometimes not so subtle humiliations. A good example of the humiliation that was also profitable to the humiliator is this crucifix on Charles Bridge, near enough the Jewish quarter to make its point. The inscription tells us that the Jews in Prague in 1696 were judged by a royal court to be blasphemers. And the fine that was given was in part used to put Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts in Hebrew letters above the image of this Jew from Nazareth. If the community had a golden age, it was surely the one that started towards the end of the 16th century and lasted right up to the reign of Maria Theresa. It came about through a combination of circumstances. Better trade conditions, an easing of the restrictions of the various guilds, and a very talented group of people. And together, and with the rabbis whom they attracted and invited to the community, they formed self-help institutions, schools, academies, so that teachers and students came here from Germany, from Poland. They built the Jewish town hall. They formed a notable Chevra Kadisha, or Holy Brotherhood, which was devoted to the helping of the bereaved and the vulnerable in the community. And there was a tradition of philanthropy that started here that was to last right up to the modern period. And something of this philosophy of being of use to the community traveled into so many other parts of the Jewish world and helped to set fine standards everywhere. Rabbi Lev stands out as the leader par excellence in the golden age of this community. The Maharal, as he became known, meaning Morenu Harav Rav Lev, our master and our teacher, Rabbi Lev, was a mathematician, an educationalist, one of the great scholars of his time. He was opposed to the messianic speculation that was rife in his day. He felt that it was a mistake to try to force the end. By all means, he counseled, pray for redemption, but not too hard. And he was fearful, with an almost fearful prophecy, that before that redemption would come, Israel's degradation would be greatest. When it came to a Talmudic teaching that the Messiah was born on the day when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, he said, of course, this wasn't a physical birth, that it means that the messianic or redemptive potential exists in the world. He was alone and an original thinker, but the impression he left on this community lasts to this day. From the day he died in 1609, this seat, which was his seat in the synagogue, has never been occupied by anyone else. And I sometimes think that it is an example of God's sense of humor, that this rationalist thinker should best be remembered by posterity for the legends of the golem that are connected with him. The legend is that in the spring of 1590, the time of persecution, Rabbi Lev created the golem. One night, accompanied by his son-in-law, who was a Cohen, and a disciple who was a Levi, they went down to the Vltava River, found a clay bed, shaped a human figure out of the clay, walked around it, recited Kabbalistic formulae. Then the rabbi put 3 Hebrew letters on the figure's forehead, Aleph, Mem, Tav, meaning truth, emet, and the figure came to life. It was speechless, completely obedient. The rabbi named him Joseph, put on him the sexton's robe, brought him home and introduced him as a dumb stranger who would be part of the household. And most of the stories, and there are so many of them, are connected with the way the golem helped to save the Jewish community, mostly from the plots of those who hated the Jews, especially one Thaddeus, a fanatical monk. But the golem could only fulfill orders. The rabbi, before Rosh Hashanah, says to the golem, go and get me some fish from the river. And the rabbi went off to do his studies. By the time he came back, the house was filled with fish. Many things the rabbi had that year, but not a sweet-smelling Rosh Hashanah. If you were told, as sometimes I was told, the bist a lemener golem, that you are a clay golem, they did not mean it as a compliment. However, there were signs that the golem was running out of control. So one night, on Lag BaOmer, the rabbi, together with the 2 people who helped him to create the golem, quietly went upstairs, and they simply erased the Aleph from the sleeping golem's forehead. And so the 2 letters that were left, meaning met, dead, did it. The golem became clay again. And the rabbi ordered that the room be sealed, and it has been ever since. No one has ever gone into the attic of the synagogue. And when I was a child, and I used to play around here, and I would go as high as I could, I sometimes thought that I heard some movement, but it couldn't be true, could it? The community went into a steep decline during the 18th century, especially during the reign of Empress Maria Theresa. She was a capricious and a very greedy lady. At one time, she ordered the expulsion of the Jews and fined the community 160,000 gulden. Well, the expulsion order was rescinded, but the fine had to be paid. Jews had to wear yellow badges. They could not shave. Only the oldest son may marry. Even what sections of the Talmud rabbis could teach. There is a bitter irony in the fact that 200 years later, the ghetto, which was the staging post for the final liquidation of the Jews of this area, was named Theresienstadt, Theresa's city. It's not difficult to see why, during the revolution of 1848, when nationalism in Czech circles flourished for a while, Jews allied themselves with that cause. The revolution was suppressed, and many of the Jews soon found themselves on a wanted list, including Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise, who went to the United States. There he founded the Hebrew Union College, where I received my rabbinic education much later. And here in Prague, as the 19th century unfolded, there was the dawn of another golden age, a more liberal spirit, a rush to industry and technology, less discrimination against the Jews, and greater opportunity to be productive. To make and to sell textiles and shoes, glass and china and machines of many kinds, also to produce art, music, literature, and to enter the professions. The ghetto was modernized, and while some of Prague's Jews were building magnificent new synagogues, some were raising the banner of early Zionism, and others were assimilating, moving through the gradually opening doors of Czech society. If there was anything sinister brewing in the air, hardly anyone noticed it. The exception was Franz Kafka. His sensitivity understood that what was happening was the alienation of the individual who becomes a symbol. In most of his stories, Kafka writes about a character called K. We're standing now outside the house in the castle precincts of Prague, where Kafka lived with his sister. And it is precisely about the castle, which represents power of the state, of a hierarchy. It is to that castle that one day Kay arrives, only to be told, not long after he gets there, that there is no way that he can really be fully admitted to the inner precincts of that castle. But what are you? They say to him. You're not from the castle. You're not from the village. You are nothing at all. Or rather, unfortunately, you are something. A stranger. A man who isn't wanted and is in everybody's way. A man who's always causing trouble. Now, I ask myself, is it reading too much into this? But is this not how the Jews came to be perceived? In Kafka's time, here in Prague and throughout this part of the world, Jews had full legal rights. They had legal equality. But what Kafka understood so clearly was that they had no social equality. When the First World War ended in 1918, and in order to break up the Austro-Hungarian as well as the German empires, Czechoslovakia became a long-hoped-for reality. Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia, Slovakia, and my own native Carpathia were united in a federal republic. They were creating a truly plural society. Czechs, Slovaks, and Ruthenians, Gypsies, Germans, Hungarians, and Jews, with great respect for traditions, language, and religion. People could even opt for their own nationality. And so, uniquely in Europe, could the Jews. Indeed, there was a census in the year in which I was born in 1930, where we find that there were in the country just about 350,000 Jews, and 204,000 of them opted for Jewish nationality. This meant that they could have their own schools, newspapers, publications, cultural life, certainly religious communities. And as far as the first president of the Republic, Tamás Garrigue Masaryk, and his successor, Eduard Beneš, were concerned, Jews liked them, trusted them, even loved them. And then came 1938. And after a few angry words and some perfunctory signatures in Munich, with the civilized world either colluding or just standing idly by, the Republic came to an end. Within a very short time, Western Bohemia or Sudetenland was integrated into Greater Germany. Bohemia, Moravia became German protectorates, Slovakia a Nazi puppet regime, and Carpathia liberated by the Hungarians. And there descended upon the Jews of this land an impenetrable night and fog for a period of 6 years. And when it lifted, its Jewry was devastated. For a time, on the walls of the Pinkas synagogue, there were inscribed 77,292 names of men, women, and children taken from the Prague district, never to return. And not far from here, the Nazis set up a Treuhandlungsstelle, a trustee office to administer confiscated Jewish properties. They filled 54 warehouses with valuable furniture, carpets, works of art. 11 synagogues, including the Altnai Shul, were set aside as a collection point for religious objects from this and 153 other communities. They included 5,400 ritual objects, 6,070 historically valuable objects and documents, 24,500 rare volumes of sacred literature. And all this was to form the core of the Central Museum of the Vanished Jewish Race, to be opened once Germany had won the war. And in nearby Theresienstadt or Terezin, Jewish children were writing poems. They drew pictures of yellow butterflies before they boarded the trains to Auschwitz.